All right. Very good. It's my pleasure now to announce a joint meeting with the planning board regarding Green Communities Stretch Code, presentation by the Mass Department of Energy Resources with support by Old Colony Planning Council and Guardian Energy. I would like the planning board to acknowledge themselves so that everybody knows who is on this Zoom from the planning board.
So Chuck Camo, Chairman of the Planning Board, is present.
Robert Pillarello, Vice Chairman, is present.
Jason Suzor, Clerk of the Planning Board, is present.
And Charlie, is you muted? All right, then we're gonna mute Charlie for you. All right, Charlie.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you? Oh, Charlie Marinelli, Associate on the Planning Board.
Very good, thank you. Certainly the other participants that are going to be giving the presentation tonight, I'd like them to introduce themselves also. Won't everyone fight over it?
I'm Lisa Sullivan from the Department of Energy Resources. I'm the Southeast Regional Coordinator.
Thank you.
You've got William DeRigo on the phone as well. I'm with ICF.
Thank you.
My name is Joanne Zygmunt from Old Colony Planning Council. We'll be helping you with the Green Communities Energy Reduction Plan and vehicle use policies. So tonight I'm here mostly to listen.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barbara Ayotte, and I'm heading up sales and marketing at Guardian Energy Management Solutions, and we look forward to helping the town of Avon reduce your energy use and save operational costs.
Thank you.
And my name's Mary Waldron. I'm the Executive Director of Old Colony Planning Council, here to listen as well and to support Joanne Zygmunt from the Old Colony Planning Council staff.
Thank you very much. Town Administrator, I'll leave it up to you.
So, Mr. Chairman, you may remember some time ago where we talked about moving forward with the Green Communities Act. So we got a grant from Old Colony Planning Council to assist us. One of the main parts to this is the stretch code. We had discussions with different departments as well as the state on what we could do to bring this forward. So we decided to have Lisa and different parts of Guardian Energy to come in to talk to the planning board as well as to the board, because the stretch code is something that has to be approved by town meeting. And it is one of the things that does hang up on a couple towns when they apply for the green community. So we wanted to bring in the experts to discuss it so that if anyone had any questions or concerns, they could hear it straight from the experts themselves. So I'll turn it over to Lisa to start the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Greg.
No problem. Do you know how to have your PowerPoint up, or you want me to get it?
Could you, I thought you were going to share the, will you share the screen?
Oh, I was going to do it for you. Hold on one second.
Yep. So I'm just going to go through the generalities of the program just so everyone understands what the Green Communities Program is and what it offers the town. And then Will DeRigo is from ICF, who is a code expert, is going to come in and do the stretch code part of the presentation. And then we can have a question and answer period after to answer any questions you have about the program in general or about the stretch code.
Okay.
Just give me a second. Yeah.
No problem. And I'll just cue you and say next slide. Greg, does that work for you?
Sure. Oh, come on. Apparently I sent way too many emails today. Hold on one second. Now it's downloading. Apparently the Wi-Fi is a little slow. There we go.
So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I represent 84 cities and towns in Massachusetts. I have the Southeast region. 55 of the towns in my region are already green communities. And I have about 24 who are looking to become green communities in the next 2 years. And I have a few towns that are served by municipal light plants, and they do not have any service from from investor-owned utilities. So they're not eligible to become a green community yet. So that's basically who I represent. I help towns get out the information, I help manage their grants, and I work with them. And OCPC, your regional planning agency, helps provide support, which DOER funds through technical assistance grants. Next slide, please. So the Green Communities Division is the energy hub for all Massachusetts cities and towns, not just designated green communities. DOR's mission statement is to help create a clean, affordable, and resilient energy future for the Commonwealth. The Baker-Polito administration really is working hard to give communities the resources they need to fund clean energy solutions and reduce their long-term costs. Next slide, please. So the Green Communities Division offers several different programs. We have the Designation and Grant Program. We have an LED street light retrofit grant program. We offer the Mass Energy Insight energy tracking and analysis tool. We offer meta grants, which are municipal energy technical assistance. We have an EVIT program, which is an electric vehicle incentive program. And we also have the Regional Energy Planning Assistance Grant, we call it REPA, that allows technical assistance to be funded through DOR for the regional planning agencies to share with our communities. Next slide. So there are 271 green communities in the Commonwealth out of the 351. 31 communities were recently designated, 13 in the Southeast region alone. Next slide, please. The Designation and Grant Program gives up to $20 million a year in grants to qualifying communities. So it means you have to have been designated and you have to have closed out one grant to open another one. These grants fund energy efficiency initiatives, renewable energy projects, and innovation projects. The kind of projects that people do are LED lighting, VFDs, HVAC updates, all kinds of different projects, streetlight retrofits, and it really helps improve energy efficiency in your municipal buildings and schools, and also improve occupant comfort. Next slide, please. So to date, we're really making a lot of progress toward ambitious energy goals. We've given away $123.6 million in grants, which is accounted for $17.5 million in savings in energy bills. We've completed over 480 grants in the Commonwealth. And then the projected savings in MMBTUs and in CO2 is in this square on the slide, and it's equal to 4,414 single-family homes or 9,348 cars. So it's the equivalent of taking those off the road. Next slide, please. So this just goes to show you what you would have to look forward to if you were to become a green community. We give designation grants plus, which are based on $125,000 base, plus is a population and per capita income formula. The max grant is $1 million. And then we give away competitive grants annually that people apply for, usually in the spring. And those projects would fund energy conservation measures that would be identified in your energy reduction plan, which Joanne from OCPC is going to help you with. And this is what some of your neighbors have received up to date. Abington was designated in 2017. They've received $164,900. Brockton was designated in 2017. They've already received $766,000. That's in part because their designation grant was over $500,000 because their population is close to 100,000 people. And I'll leave that for you. You have that slide, but like even Bridgewater, who's not on the slide, has received over $1 million to date. Next slide, please.
Eric, you didn't want to say anything?
I'll stay away from it.
The designation grant in Avon would be approximately $135,000. That's the funding you would receive to do your first energy efficiency projects that would be identified in your energy reduction plan. So you identify, Guardian will help you do audits of your buildings. They'll help you identify projects that will reduce your overall energy use. And then you'll prioritize those as a board and decide which ones align with your plans for any given year. So you might try to do something that aligns with a capital project that you had on your budget or on your capital plan, for example. Next slide. This is just the process for becoming a green community. It's basically just says that we'd like to have the elected officials obviously on board, and then we'll work with you to get your application in. Next slide. So this is the qualification criteria. There's 5 criteria to become a green community. You have to adopt as-of-right siting for renewable energy or alternative energy generation or R&D or manufacturing. Avon already meets that criteria, so you're all set with criteria 1. You have to adopt an expedited permitting process. You actually already have that probably in place because it's for the areas that you have the as-of-right siting for manufacturing that already qualifies. You just have to say that you would not have a permit exceed a 365-day permitting process, which for as-of-right siting would be, most rules and regs don't allow you to exceed that. You would create an energy reduction plan to reduce your energy use in your buildings and your vehicles by 20% in 5 years. You would adopt a fuel-efficient vehicle purchase policy, and you would minimize life cycle costs in new construction by adopting the stretch code. Next slide, please. So criteria 1, I'm not even going to go over that because you already meet that. You have renewable alternative energy manufacturing facilities in designated locations. So in industrial areas, you allow this as of right. So you meet the criteria, and that's already been confirmed by DOER. Next slide. Expedited permitting, we just require a letter that's from your legal counsel that says you would not exceed a 12-month permit date in that industrial area for those as-of-right permits. Next slide. Criteria 3 is creating the baseline energy in MEI, and also finding 20% of energy reduction in your buildings. What we do is we have Guardian go out and do the audits. They'll come back, they'll offer some projects and proposals to help reduce your energy by 20% over 5 years. We'll also do a vehicle inventory, and just so you know that this grant can also help you fund vehicles and charging stations as well. Next slide. So criteria 4 is the fuel efficient vehicle policy. We'll be looking to have you adopt this by your Board of Selectmen and also by the school department. It says that you'll purchase only fuel efficient vehicles for municipal use whenever these vehicles become commercially available. Police cruisers and other emergency vehicles are exempt until they are commercially available. And when we say commercially available, we mean they have to have at least 5 manufacturers have them. They have to be readily available. So I anticipate this will still be a ways down the line. Heavy duty vehicles such as fire trucks, ambulances, and DPW trucks are typically exempt if they have a gross vehicle weight of 8,500 pounds or more. Next slide. So this is the criteria for fuel efficient vehicle policy. So basically what this is saying is this is what we would anticipate that you would do if you had a vehicle that was non-exempt. For example, a fleet car in the building inspector's office that went out to do inspections. That would be a non-exempt vehicle. And we would anticipate if you were to buy a 2-wheel drive car that it would get at least 30 miles per gallon. It Does not have to be an electric vehicle, although we could help you with funding for that through our grant program. But pretty much I would say that these miles per gallon are pretty standard and readily available. Next slide, please. So we have a policy on recycling. You can move a previously purchased vehicle from one municipal department to another municipal department if it is more efficient than the vehicle it is replacing. So in other words, if you want to take a Ford Explorer from fire department and move it to the building inspector, it would have to meet the mileage required. It has to be more efficient than what you're replacing. Okay, next slide, please. And this is criteria 5. Will, can you pop in here?
Sure can, yeah. Ooh, there's a little bit of an echo.
Let me check it. Hold on 1 sec. Let me just mute a couple people and then see if that works.
Hopefully it's just not on my end. Oh, that already works better, yep. Okay, so hello everyone. Again, my name is Will Dorigo. I just want to give myself a quick introduction, some background of how I got into this, and yeah, just speak to criteria 5. So again, my name is Will. I've been working with the Mass Save umbrella this is my 16th year. Prior to that, I was doing some property management work with my business partner. The two of us now have close to 20 apartment units that we renovate and bring up to pretty efficient standards, and that got me into into this world. So again, I want to talk about the criteria 5, and what this is going to require is that all residential new construction and commercial industrial real estate minimize to the extent feasible the lifestyle cost of the facility by using basically energy efficiency. Water conservation gets you there. You can do some renewables. You can do some other stuff with like wind purchases, etc. The DOER recommended ways for cities and towns to meet this requirement by adopting the stretch code. It's an appendix to the Mass State Building Code. Next slide. So as you can see on this map, over 278 municipalities have adopted the stretch code. It's clear to see that this isn't really all that hard. It's basically, in the beginning, it might have been a little tough, but builders all over the state have really embraced it, and it's kind of the way forward. Next slide. So again, we want to make sure that people understand what this actually is and who it applies to. The current stretch code, it only applies to residential new construction and new commercial construction greater than 100,000 square feet. So think of your Home Depots, your bigger buildings, those big kind of commercial spaces, labs, stuff like that. That's it. So if you have an addition that you're working on, if you're a homeowner and you own your home, you're doing a renovation, you want to do some work in the bathroom or your kitchen, that's exempt from the stretch code. You do not have to participate in the stretch code. There's an alternative path there, but again, this really only applies to new construction. Next slide. So for documentation for this, the documentation of the city or town meeting vote, sorry, I just lost my place here. So documentation of the city or town needs to be voted in, and that's what we're going to discuss. We can keep going here. Next slide. So stretch code, these are some misconceptions that there have been. This is new, it's experimental. People don't know how to do this. How are we going to get this done? It's really not. It's not anything new. It's not anything out of the ordinary. It's based on the Energy Star for Homes program, which has been around for a while. Again, I mentioned that I started doing basically home energy ratings, which we'll get to in a minute, 16 years ago. And we'll kind of cover that. But at that time, I was basically working on what was known then as Energy Star Homes. So nothing new there. Stretch code requires tight, unhealthy homes. Again, that is a misconception. That is just not true. The building science has evolved. People want fresh air, especially now. People are thinking about fresh air, ways to control air. How do you get air in and out of the building properly? Again, tight buildings, that's also required by the base code. So keep that in mind that just by regular code right now, as you have to do it, you do have to tighten up these homes. we want you to ventilate them properly. Make sure you're putting in the right mechanicals, the right ventilation systems in there. Another one, homes with oil heat can't meet stretch code. Again, that is a misconception, and we'll show you a slide later that kind of even proves that case. It is easier with gas, but again, there's ways around it. With oil, you could go with propane, you could do all electric homes. There's benefits to doing electric homes with solar. So again, you could still do it even with oil. Another one, town residents, they'll be required to update their existing homes. Again, no, this really only applies to residential new construction and commercial construction greater than 100,000 square feet. If you're doing a renovation or an addition, you do not have to worry about the stretch code. Next slide. So I kind of already said it a couple times, and it's worth repeating, but the stretch code is really not much of a stretch. The energy codes, they evolve. They happen every 3 years. They get a facelift. The base energy code was adopted by the state for 2017, was the IECC 2015. I'm going to get to this later in the slide deck, but that is changing again. But everything we're covering now is still going to apply. And we'll see there's really, again, also not much of a change for the 2018 version. So the current base code, it allows the builders 2 options. And again, this is for residential and commercial new construction. The 2 options are prescriptive, which is just a checklist of compliance measures. There's inspections during and post-construction. And there's also the performance path. So if you go to the next slide, please. What the stretch code is looking at is that you just take the performance path. That's really the difference. So there's nothing like, builders gonna have to learn or figure out or, anything kind of out of the ordinary. It is already part of the current code. So you just have the option. What the stretch code does is it's removing the prescriptive option. We just want you to go with that performance option and use a home energy rater to really ensure that the performance was met, make sure that the modeling was done to find other ways to kind of save energy in the building. Next slide. So again, I kind of talked about this, and I mentioned some stuff repeats, but people are wondering, what is a HERS rating? What is the home energy rating system? That's exactly what it is. It's a home energy rating system based on a bunch of different pieces that are up here on the slide. So you want to look at annual energy costs. The analysis looks at the heating, the cooling loads, your water heating loads, what your lights and appliances put out, and in some cases, on-site power generation, so solar. The reference home is based on a home that was built in the 2006 IECC, that code version. So the scale, what's shown on the right here, goes from 0, and in this case, it goes up to 150. A standard home that was being built in 2006 would have been at that 100 target. For our targets now, for Massachusetts, the home needs to achieve a HERS index of 55. So that basically means it's 45% more efficient than the reference home. Next slide. What is the HERS process? So there's 3 steps here. The first step is creating this computer energy model based on plans that the builder has. The reason for that is you look for ways to improve either wall insulation, attic insulation, window, even orientation. So you might have heard of kind of solar south-facing glass and kind of pointing the home in that direction to gain some of the sunlight in the winter. That can be done all through modeling. It really can't be done prescriptively. There's no way to kind of really find out the energy use just through a checklist. With the modeling, you can. The second step there is to have these inspections. So you've got inspections to check your ductwork. You've got inspections to make sure that the insulation for your walls is properly installed. A lot of contractors can just throw it in and it looks like it's in there and it's doing its job, but if it's not installed properly, it's not doing its job. Then you got the final inspection. So in the picture there, you see what the blower door test, that's what it actually is. It's taking that setup and it's depressurizing the home to measure exactly how much air is coming in or out of that home. And then step 3, it's finalizing the energy model based on that verified performance. So you can kind of see this big red box around number 2. That again is already part of the base code. So if you were building today anyway, you're already doing some of these steps. You're doing the blower door, you're doing this duct tightness testing, It's all kind of part of what is base code at this moment. Next slide. So why test performance? Because again, checking off boxes isn't the greatest way to actually test performance. I kind of mentioned the example of just going in and looking at that fiberglass wall. You go in, you kind of see stapled up paper. That's all you really see unless you're digging in. So what can be behind that craft face bat? Well, you've got wiring. Your electrician, he runs wires across all the bays. There's little outlet boxes, there's plumbing. All that stuff could be behind that paper. And if it's just mushed into place or not cut to fit, you get these little voids. You have places for condensation. You have a lot of air gaps. You've got disrupted thermal performance. And as you can see, like those little gaps can reduce R values by 50% or more. A home energy rater, they're paid to go in there and really kind of get on the subs to make sure they're doing it right. That's what they train to do. That's what their certificate and training is looked at. And it's really a rigorous program in that they have a lot of third-party quality assurance. So they're getting checked. Somebody's checking them. You know, there's a lot of chain to look at and just make sure things are being done properly. Next slide. So the Mass Save program offers some great incentives to offset some of these costs. Again, it's really kind of a great offering because it kind of does two things. One, it gives this rater incentive to help offset some of that cost. And two, it in some cases, depending on how it's done, the builder incentive can go directly to the builder. So they're going to be helping offset some of those costs, or they can just pass it on to a homeowner. But again, the breakout is that one incentive goes to the rater and one goes to the builder. The calculation is there. You can kind of review it. I don't have to go through it because I know it's a tough equation to kind of just look at on face value. But when we go to the next slides, we'll look at some of these costs and how it works. So we talked about in the beginning, oil heat homes. They can't be done. It's hard. Well, here's the example showing that it is not. What we can see here is that we've got the target of the 55. And in your base code home, the example that we've modeled was a 61. In the stretch code home, the example we modeled is a 51. So we're looking at, right, these costs and then the utility rebates, kind of what the changes would be to the home buyer. And when you look at the cash flow on year one for that homeowner, it's positive day one, year one. To the builder, when you look at the incremental cost, again, it's a fraction of a fraction for the total construction cost. So this really isn't that difficult to achieve. To look at some of these breakdown of costs, if you jump to the next slide, you can see what those changes were. So that red number at the bottom right corner was that first cost slide, or that first cost number in the previous slide. And how do we get there, right? So we talked about the differences we had to do. In this case, in the base code home, we had a 0.30 window. In our stretch code home, we improved it slightly, $500 cost there. The home energy rating. So the rater already has to go in to do a blower door test. They're already doing duct testing. That $500 cost is really kind of doing the energy modeling and some of that consulting work up front and sometimes on the back end as well. So there's a $500 added there. Cooling, a little bit of an upgrade to the air conditioner. And then domestic hot water, a little bit of an upgrade to the hot water system. So in this case, we went from just a straight electric tank to a heat pump water heater. And that's it. Those are the changes. That brings you from base code to stretch code. Next slide. So here we've got a propane home. Also to add to this, when we get to the 2018 piece, I'll kind of talk about it, but they've also upgraded what type of mechanical systems have to go in at the prescriptive level for a base code home. So keep that in mind when you look at some of these slides. So here we got propane. Again, you look at the cash flows. So in the first year, it's a little bit of a negative because your change to the down payment goes up a little bit, and your annual mortgage payment goes up a little bit because you've had this little bit of a net cost difference. But by year two, again, to the homeowner, positive. You're getting savings every year. And our oil rates, as you can see, they go up and down. Right now, we had the energy cost at 0.288. Since it fluctuates, I mean, these are fluctuate, but the longer point of it is that every year, the rates are going to more than likely go up. Like we know that the rates are going to kind of go back up once all this coronavirus stuff is over with. And we've seen them constantly going up. So the higher they go up, the more you're going to end up saving anyway. Next slide. We don't have to go through each one of these, but we just kind of wanted to show the examples. But this was for a propane home. I think the next one is going to be natural gas. So again, positive cash flow by year 2. And the total costs, again, are fractions to the builder. And then our last one there is an electric home. And again, for this one, for the homeowner, it's positive year 1, and to the builder, it's the smallest little bit you could ask for in terms of a cost difference. So next slide. So here's an example of a commercial building. I'm not sure if you have too many commercial buildings out in your area, but again, this is kind of just looking at basically what it would do for what an energy audit basically would do for a commercial building if you did have them in place. You can kind of apply it to even some of your town buildings. But if we go to the next slide, you can kind of see what the savings are just by doing, things like lighting, demand control. There's a bunch of little different things you can do for the different system types. And again, we're looking at payback with incentives for that particular building. That example we had from Leominster, the payback was 1.2 years. And then without incentives, the payback would still be like 3.7 years. And you guys own the buildings that are in your town for perpetuity. So, I mean, you're going to find these savings. They're going to come back to you year after year. Next slide. So another study reveals that homes that have had home energy ratings, they sold on average 2.7% more than comparable unrated homes. The homes with lower HERS index scores are sold for 3 to 5% more than homes with higher index scores. And again, this is definitely on realtors, the marketing, kind of how they speak to it, and it's catching on there as well. It's obviously a pretty big deal. Energy has just been always kind of going up. It's never going to go down, energy use, except for in a situation like this. But as soon as things open back up, energy use is starting to go back up as well. So yeah, the market will catch up, and they're going to sell for more. Next slide. So I talked about this again earlier, because things are kind of changing and they change every 3 years. We do have another change that's happening. It already happened. So it basically happened in February, but there was a concurrency period. And then as soon as August 7th hits, everything will be going to the 2018 IACC. Again, there's almost no change to the residential code or the stretch code. It's all going to still be based on a HERS at 55. So what is new, it just does kind of break out that 4-story multifamily will now have to follow the HERS or passive house path. Again, passive house is just a separate option. Don't have to go that route. You can just do what we talked about in terms of the home energy rating. Also for electric homes, so if you're doing an air source heat pump or a ground source heat pump, that target is a 60. So when we looked at that cost analysis slide, the target was 60 because that's what's going to be in place. It is in place now and will be the only option come August 7th. Next slide. So the proposed timeline, there's going to be another one. So there'll be another change coming up. So this one, we'll see a draft of this published in the fall for 2020 public comment. The BBRS, they'll hold hearings in November, and there'll obviously be additional hearings before anything is determined. But the goal there is to have a new stretch code ready to align with the timing of the 10th edition of the building code. The final vote will go out in the summer of 2021, and then things again, they won't change until 2022. So we've got some time there before anything changes again. So what we just covered today, nothing's really changing there until 2022. Everything's going to be pretty much as noted. You can note if there is a zero energy component, we anticipate that it will be optional. So municipalities can vote to opt in to require renewables. There's going to be no need for current green communities to maintain that designation. So that should be pretty much it. If there are any questions, feel free to fire away.
So I've been part of the green communities in another town. I am pretty well versed on some of this, but I wanted to present for the planning board, as I know it would be a zoning change, and wanted to have them have the ability to hear the presentation and ask any questions, because we would look for support from the planning board going forward at town meeting. I think the other thing we would want to let people know is that we would, with this idea that we would get the support from the planning board and the idea that we would be moving this forward, we would look to have our energy audit sooner rather than later. I believe that was the intent of making sure we had this meeting tonight and see where everybody stood on it. If any questions, please, from the planning board, let us know.
So are there any conditions involved in receiving any of these grants in addition to anything that's outlined in this presentation?
No, there's no conditions. You just have to, there's a contract with the state. Once you achieve designation, you do a project application for your initial, let's say your initial grant is $135,000. You'd put forth a project application picking out the projects from your energy reduction plan. And then we'd send out a contract and it would be signed on both ends. And then you get an okay to proceed date. And then Guardian potentially would do the work that they identified in these buildings for you. And that once those projects are done, there'd be a reporting requirement. It's a reimbursable grant. So what happens is when you get once the contract is signed, we send out 25% of the funding right away. Then we send out 50% once you spent the first 25%, and you send us invoices and proof of payment. And then we send out the final 25% once you've expended the grant and show us proof of payment and invoices and do a final report. And I come out and I do an inspection, just a visual look at the projects to make sure everything was installed and to make sure you're happy with everything that was done.
And then Lisa, after that, that's when you would then be able to, once that's cleared out, then you could apply for the competitive part. You don't have anything else as long as you've spent that money.
Correct. So the only things that are required is you can only do projects in buildings that are included in your baseline and your energy reduction plan. I know you're doing some additions and updates soon. Those buildings you could always add into your energy reduction plan after the fact, and we could augment your baseline. But that's one of the conditions. You can only have one grant open at a time. So you have to close out your designation grant in order to apply for a competitive grant. And you have to close out a competitive grant to apply for the next round the following year. So pretty much that's it. And you're a green community unless you, for example, when you adopt the stretch code, you adopt future editions of the stretch code. If for some reason you ever decided that you didn't want to be a stretch code community, you could rescind it at town meeting, but then you wouldn't be a green community anymore. So that doesn't mean you'd have to give money back or anything like that, but you wouldn't be eligible for any future grants. So that's how that would work. No one's ever rescinded the stretch code at town meeting. It's just we let you know that because some people do express concern about codes change. And this is just a reassurance that if it doesn't meet the appetite of the community, then you do have the way out.
So what are some of the average costs added to the new construction by having the HERS rated do all these inspections that is usually performed by the building department anyway?
So I can take that one. So again, the inspections that have to happen by a rater, they already happen with base code. So there's no change in cost there. Again, that change is really only for the energy modeling in the base code. So if you're building today in a non-stretch community and just a base community in your community, you would still need to have somebody come in and do an inspection and do a blower door and a duct test. It's separate from the building official. So again, the cost is kind of what we show on those slides. It's very, very minimal.
I just want to add one thing. For example, in Plymouth, who is also seeking green community status this year, and they also have the help of OCPC to do so. I've done presentations. Will was with me. We did a stretch code presentation back in early March. And what they told us is they're already building to the stretch code. They do a lot of residential construction in Plymouth and commercial, much more than Avon, thousands of units per year. And they were saying that the builders are building to the stretch code now, even though they're not even a stretch code community. So this is something that the majority of builders are really doing in the majority of communities.
So similar to other grants that we get, I mean, this is money that we would have to fund the project through town meeting the same way we would at any other capital project and then go for reimbursable funds, correct?
No. So you identify the projects, you do a grant application, we review the projects, and then we fund the money. Unless you need additional funding, for example, let's say a competitive grant is $200,000 and you identify $250,000 worth of HVAC work that you want to do, then you would need an additional $50,000. You'd need a town contribution if our grant maxed out at 200. But other than that, you would just probably accept the grant at a selectmen's meeting, just like you would accept any other kind of grant funding. So we don't require a match or a town contribution with our grants. It's only if you want to do a project that is greater than what the grant allows.
Does this apply to new construction projects that the town would be performing on buildings that it owns or just existing buildings?
No, it's energy. What we're trying to encourage you to do is make energy efficiency improvements and to reduce your overall energy use by 20% over 5 years. So this is only funding projects, upgrades in existing buildings that are part of your energy reduction plan. However, Mass Save and the utilities will work with you, and they would, even if you're not a green community, to help make your new construction as efficient as possible and make sure that you can take advantage of incentives. And that's open to you at any time. And if you have new construction going on and you want to be put in touch with the new construction team, we're happy to help you with that.
Okay, because we happen to have a new fire station renovation project. So I'm trying to figure out if a renovation project in building would be eligible for anything that you're offering, or would it just be along the Mass Save line? It's not all brand new construction. It's new additions, but it's renovation of the existing building.
So something that you're renovating, if let's say you had existing lighting in the existing part of the building and you wanted to upgrade it to LED, that would qualify for the grant. But if you're adding additional HVAC units to cool and heat the new building or the new addition, then we would not pay for that. So if it's new, if it's a complete addition, it's not something that didn't exist before, then it wouldn't save energy, so we wouldn't pay for it. We would put you in touch with the new construction team for those things. But say work in your town hall, lighting, HVAC work, that kind of thing, that building needs like weatherization efforts, insulation efforts, those kind of things are things our grant would fund.
Chuck, I think on your point, there are some things in terms of that building that could. So if you're replacing those front bay doors, and there's ones that are more insulation, and I don't know if those actually qualify, but those are just an example of something that would be existing that you may replace and have energy savings. If it meets the threshold, that could be something that might be covered, right, Lisa?
That is true. In Bridgewater, when I worked in Bridgewater, for example, we did do a couple of bay doors in our highway barn that through this grant, they were very rotted through in the bottom panel, and they qualified.
Okay. So who would make the determination on your team as to whether we could take a look at this project?
Well, you can take a look at the project, but first you have to be designated. So you have to pass the stretch code. You have the designation process to get through before we talk about actual funding. You still have to get to the 5 criteria, get designated, and then you put in an application. I don't anticipate you'd be submitting a project application until probably next, like February. So I don't know if you're going to be waiting on these projects until then, but we certainly would be more than happy to talk to you about what might qualify depending on your timeline and what wouldn't qualify. And we can also put you in touch with representatives from the utility and Mass Save.
But Lisa, wouldn't that show up on our energy reduction plan if we get to that point?
Yes, but
so that
I don't
would be
know. I don't know your construction timeline is I guess what I'm getting at.
Oh, yeah, it could be a point where we're waiting for the doors to come in. I'm just thinking we would first get an idea from the energy reduction plan done by Guardian.
Yes.
That would show if those doors qualify. Then we would know ahead of time when we get to the point of applying in the fall, getting designated in January or whatever the timeline is, and then getting the funding in February, March. That's when we would be able to purchase it and move forward with the funding, but we would know ahead of time, Chuck.
Yeah, okay.
Correct.
Well, I think it'd be important to incorporate Mass Save into that project immediately.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Greg, can you make the slideshow available? Can you send it to me separately so I can review it?
Yep.
The only comment I have on it is that as far as and I know we're not talking necessarily right now about funding, but we do have quite a few projects out there that this may fall under. But for future projects, and this is where I was going with my last question, Greg, and I don't know if this is mainly aimed towards you, is that most of the projects we're talking about, like, for example, if we were talking about street lighting, if we were talking about HVAC units, are going to fall under our capital rules, which is we're going to require an active town meeting to get them passed anyway. So we are really still talking about funding projects prior to any kind of reimbursement.
No, if it's through the grant process, again, it would actually come out of the it would stay in the capital plan, but the capital plan would change to say green community, possible funding source, DOER, competitive grant, first year grant, and you wouldn't have to go to town meeting to fund that one item. You would fund it for the streetlights maybe if, say, we got a competitive grant, like Lisa said, for 100 and it's 120, then we would go to town meeting for the $20,000. But we wouldn't necessarily.
So we'll know if we get the grant prior to actually doing the project.
Yes.
But prior to requesting the project through town meeting as well, or are you saying we no longer would need a active town meeting in order to do certain things that fall under the capital criteria?
So when people submit their grant requests, if they have, what they'll usually do is we have an Excel spreadsheet and it will say where the funding source is, if it exceeds what the grant will pay for. So if it's a $200,000 grant and you have a $225,000 project, you would show that $25,000 is expected to come from the town's capital plan. At that point, depending on the timing, competitive grant applications are usually due in March, late February, early March. You would probably while we're reviewing your application, you might be thinking about going to spring town meeting and reserving that $25,000 you might need should you get awarded the grant, in other words. In other words, we'd give you the 200, you'd get 25,000 from your town capital budget. You would still, yes, you would need to, if you need an extra $25,000, you'd need the town to approve that $25,000. But the grant funding typically, once it's awarded, usually the selectmen accept the grant and that's all that's involved.
And we can do it a year ahead.
Is there a danger of not getting the grant? I mean, what's the likelihood that we could have a situation where for some reason the grant is not approved?
It's very rare. It's a competitive grants are competitive grants. In other words, you're competing with others for the money. Exactly. But we do give away $20 million a year. And what we've done for the newer communities is we've reduced the amount of the grants for the frequent flyers. So communities that have received over $700,000 in competitive grants, we're limiting their funding so that there's more funding for the new communities. So that's one of the ways, because we do have a lot more communities coming in, and we have $20 million to go around. But so the bigger communities like that have, Bridgewater's been a green community since 2010, for example, we now limit them to $100,000 in a competitive round where you'll be allowed to apply for 200.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? So I know we have the planning board here and they are in a quorum. I don't know if they want to discuss or maybe bring this to their next meeting for further discussion, or because I know I haven't heard a lot of questions, so I don't know if they want to ferment on it for a little bit and discuss at a soon to be scheduled planning board meeting.
Well, I think, Greg, what we would need to be able to do is to have language developed that we would be able to vote on so that we would get this process correctly.
Okay. So
if it's going to be a vote that goes affirmative.
So we could do something like that. So it would be an article in town meeting, and what, I think the idea would be is to have a simple vote by the planning board to agree to move the stretch code, and I can get that set up to you so you can have it at the next meeting.
Okay.
And Greg, this item that we're putting on town meeting is a zoning bylaw change? Or just an
Yes.
acceptance of the stretch code? It's a bylaw change, right?
It's a general bylaw, not a zoning bylaw.
Not a zoning.
General bylaw, okay.
All right, so I think with the questions, we'll set everything up and talk to the planning board to have another meeting at another time and have them move to look to proceed. I do want to thank everybody for coming and being available for this meeting. I know these are not fun doing these Zoom meetings experience, but I do appreciate everybody coming in here and helping out, because this is something, as Eric said, that $135,000, we have about $260,000 worth of HVAC work alone, just in our COA and town hall. So that money would help us use our other capital funds to stretch their dollars a little bit more. So I appreciate everyone's effort, and we'll get in touch soon. So thank Lisa, thank Will, thanks all the representatives from Guardian, Mary, Joan. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
At this time, planning board, if you would like, you could motion to adjourn if you so choose.
Okay. I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion on that? Seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
So moved.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
You ready?
Yep.
Continuing on with our agenda, the chair will entertain a motion to accept the minutes of May 7th, 2020 regular session.
So moved.
Motion has been made, the chair will second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, Selectman Beckerman.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Chair will entertain a motion to accept the minutes of May 11th, 2020 regular session.
So moved.
Motion's been made, chair will second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, Selectman Beckerman.
Aye.
Chair votes aye.